Hello everybody, and welcome to Bull Technology. For the past 2 years, I have been the proud owner of a base model Steamdeck, and for the most part, it's been a terrific little console, and I'm still blown away by the fact that I can play AAA titles like Cyberpunk on a portable device. But over the past couple of years, something has really stuck out to me. I am the only person I know personally that owns or even knows what a Steam Deck is. Couple this with the fact that the number of verified games in my Steam library has only grown slightly, and this really begins to beg the question: has the Steam Deck failed, or is it a resounding success? So today we will attempt to answer this question on our 2-year check-in with this cute and capable console. Let's get started. So let's begin with a quick timeline. Valve announced the Steam Deck in July of 2021, and in February of 2022, decks were officially being shipped to customers. I received mine in September of 2022. The Steam Deck is, according to Valve, a powerful, portable gaming PC designed for comfort and a console-like user experience. Pricing for the deck starts at $349, but higher-end models stretch the price upwards of $649. Mine is the base model, which features 64 gigs of storage and an LCD display. Now, I didn't initially make a video on the Steam Deck 2 years ago because, well, that subject was pretty well covered on YouTube. But in today's video, we are going to cover my general thoughts on the deck 2 years after its debut and assess how successful the Steam Deck has been. So let's start with my thoughts on the console. I'm going to break this down into 2 sections: how I feel about the hardware and how I feel about the software. First up is the hardware. Now, the Steam Deck is truly an impressive little console. This was true when the device was new, and it's still true today. The AMD APU that powers the deck still holds up today, but I can't help but feel it's in need of an upgrade. Most games run great, but newer, more complex titles certainly do get bogged down a bit, and this is even more so the case when the deck is docked. Because Nintendo Switch, the deck certainly isn't. Over my ownership, I've also noticed that the fan gets quite loud, which of course makes sense, but it's just something to consider. The battery life is, well, so-so. I mean, in my experience, lighter titles like Stardew Valley yield hours of battery life, but more taxing games like Cyberpunk are lucky to even break an hour, so improvements can surely be made, but overall, it's not terrible. The storage has also largely been a non-issue for me. Yes, my console only shipped with 64 gigabytes of storage, but this 500 gigabyte SD card has sufficed well enough, and the ability to upgrade storage is terrific. But enough of the internals. What is the rest of the hardware like? Well, from an ergonomic perspective, the console is, again, kind of so-so. I find it a bit bulky and heavy in the hands, but not in an overly violating way. The joysticks feel very nice to use, and so too do the 4 face buttons. The D-pad leaves quite a bit to be desired though, in my opinion, and the small trackpads are, well, pretty useless in my opinion. I've also never found myself using the back paddles for anything, and if I'm being honest, the touchscreen is also very underutilized. At least the triggers and bumper buttons are comfortable enough though. Moving on to the LCD display, and the display is, well, okay. I think the perfect phrase for it is it gets the job done, and it certainly is sharp enough for the size of the device. I'm sure the extra cash is well worth it for the OLED models. What I really don't like about the deck is the physical appearance. Now, most people probably don't care, but I do, and this really does look like a first-gen product, and it's pretty ugly, much unlike the Nintendo Switch. So hardware-wise, I'm fairly satisfied. Improvements can surely be made to the raw capabilities of the deck, and I'd certainly like to see better battery life. I'd also like to see the deck shed a bit of its weight and perhaps get a fresher look, but it's hard to complain for such a capable first-generation product. Software-wise, it's much more difficult to assess the deck 2 years later. The SteamOS Linux shell is great, and the many updates have really made it feel like a proper console operating system, and the ability to boot into full Linux is terrific for power users, but this isn't where the issues lie. The issues are still with game support. Don't get me wrong, many games have been fully verified to work flawlessly on the deck, and the number of titles is impressive, but the progress has been slow, and in many cases it still feels like the Wild West. For example, only 13 out of the 50 games in my Steam library are currently verified to work on the deck, and most of these games are last generation AAA titles or easy to run indie games. My favorite genre of video games are city builder and simulation games, and most of the top games in these categories aren't supported at all. City Skylines, both 1 and 2, aren't supported, Planet Coaster isn't supported, and even The Sims 4, which has a console port, isn't supported on the deck. So game support is still kind of a hit or miss, and in my case, it's somewhere in between. I know this is largely up to game developers, but there needs to be more of a push to get games fully supported on the deck. And of course, like everyone else, I've had my fair share of software bugginess with the deck. Several updates have gotten me stuck in a terrible boot loop. The OS used to crash from time to time, and I've had lots of weird networking bugs, but again, this is a first-generation product. Software-wise, yeah, the deck is still a work in progress for sure, but things are getting better every day. So as a proud Steam Deck owner for the past 2 years, here's my general thoughts on the device before we assess the success of the deck. The Steam Deck is an incredible first-generation handheld console, but it is just that, a first-generation console, and there are still many kinks to work out. And these kinks may be the reason the Steam Deck hasn't been a slam dunk success that rivals the Nintendo Switch in terms of sales. Okay, so now let's talk about the Steam Deck and assess its success. What's interesting is that Valve has been pretty cagey when it comes to disclosing sales data for the deck, with them only claiming that it has sold, quote, multiple millions of the Steam Deck in November of 2023. A report by O-Media seems to suggest that in 2022, Valve most likely sold somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.62 million decks, and that they were on track to sell 3 million decks by the end of 2023. So it's hard to exactly quantify the success of the deck, but one other metric we can use is the weekly top sellers section on Steam, wherein for the past 2 years the deck has consistently been in the top 10. Regardless though, when you compare these sales figures to other consoles like the Switch, PlayStation, and Xbox, things don't look great at first glance. The Nintendo Switch sold close to 3 million units in the first month of it going on sale, and the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series consoles have sold over 54 million and 27 million units since they debuted. But we should consider the following. The Steam Deck is the first flagship console to come out of Valve, well, apart from the Steam machine, and also consider that the Switch and current-gen PlayStation and Xbox consoles have several years on the deck, with the Switch being 7 years old and the Xbox and PlayStation being 4 years old. And we also have to remember that the deck is in a league of its own. The deck certainly isn't a polished but stripped-down console experience. It's upgradable, it's customizable, and it runs full Linux. In this regard, it's very hard to compare the deck to its competitors. So for what the deck is, several millions in global sales are a great success, and I'm sure that this figure will only continue to grow. Does the deck look clear to overtake Microsoft and Sony in the console wars? No, but I would argue that that wasn't the goal of the deck to begin with. In the space that the deck has carved out, I think it's hard to argue that it's been a pretty successful device. Now time will only tell if this success can continue. So that's the Steam Deck 2 years later. I truly do long for the day when I see Steam Decks on the shelves of my local big box store and people in my neighborhood use their decks to play Cities Skylines. But it does seem as if that day is many years into the future. The deck is impressive and capable and successful for what it is, and that is good enough for me. Be sure to leave a like, a comment, and definitely subscribe. And thank you all for watching.